The universe has a profoundly strange sense of humor. One minute, you're standing in the beautiful, chaotic mess of your dream kitchen remodel, a fine layer of drywall dust giving you the distinguished look of a ghost who lost a fight with a sandblaster. The next, you're holding an empty coffee pot under a faucet that has decided, without any warning, to give up on its one and only job. I turned the chrome handle. Nothing. I jiggled it. Still nothing. Not a drip, not a cough, not the sad, gurgling sigh of a pipe in its death throes. Just a profound and absolute silence that was far more alarming than any leak could ever be. "Hey, Dave," I called out over the buzz of a distant sander. "We got a problem." Dave, my contractor, emerged from the future dining room. He was a man built like a vending machine, with a salt and pepper beard that had probably seen more construction dust than I'd seen of the world. He wiped his hands on his jeans, leaving a ghostly white handprint. "Don't tell me. You want to move that island again?" "Worse," I said, pointing the empty pot at the offending faucet. "The water's gone." "Gone where?" he asked, a perfectly logical question that I had no answer for. "I don't know. Florida for the winter? It's just not here." He lumbered over, a skeptical look on his face. Contractors are, by nature, skeptics. They've heard every homeowner horror story, from finding black mold to unearthing ancient burial grounds under the azaleas. The complete and total disappearance of water, however, seemed to be a new one on him. He turned the tap himself, his thick eyebrows knitted together. "Huh, that ain't right." He went to the utility sink he'd set up in the garage. A few seconds later, he was back. "Whole house is dry. You check the main?" We did. The main valve, nestled in the damp corner of the basement, was wide open just as it should be. This wasn't a me problem. This was bigger. I pulled out my phone and tapped out a quick message to my next-door neighbor, Jim. "Me. Hey, you guys have water?" The reply was almost instantaneous. "Jim. Nope. Trisha is freaking out. She's mid-rinse cycle on her hair. The neighborhood Facebook group is having a meltdown." Ah, the Pleasant Valley Estates Community Facebook group. A digital town square that was 10% pictures of lost cats, 20% recommendations for lawn care services, and 70% thinly veiled passive-aggressive warfare. I opened the app and dove in. Jim was right. It was glorious, unmitigated chaos. Brenda M. "Does anyone know what's happening? I was filling my bird bath." Tom P. "Probably the city doing maintenance again without telling us." "Typical government incompetence." Gary L. "It's 5G. I've been telling you all." I scrolled through the digital pandemonium, but my mind had already snagged on a memory from yesterday. A memory that came with a clipboard and a look of pursed-lipped disapproval. Her name was Carol, and she was the president of our homeowners association. Yesterday, she had materialized on my lawn while Dave's crew was unloading supplies. She wasn't walking or strolling. She simply appeared, as if summoned by the sound of a power tool being used during daylight hours. She held a thick 3-ring binder to her chest like a holy text and pointed a single accusatory finger at Dave's large white work van. "That commercial vehicle," she had announced, her voice carrying across the lawn with the unnatural volume of someone used to being ignored, but refusing to accept it, "has been parked on a residential street for more than the allotted 4 hours as per Bylaw 17, Section C, Paragraph 2. I had walked over, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "He's actively working on my house, Carol. The tools are in the truck. It's a bit hard to build a kitchen without them." "The bylaws make no exception for active work," she had retorted, her eyes narrowing. "Aesthetic harmony is a 24/7 commitment, Leo, a commitment some of us take more seriously than others." She'd given a pointed look at the large, plastic-wrapped dumpster in my driveway before turning on her heel and marching away, leaving a faint trail of lavender-scented indignation in her wake. Now, standing in my waterless, dust-filled kitchen, the memory clicked into place with horrifying clarity. It couldn't be, could it? No one would be that petty, that insane, right? "I'll be right back," I told Dave, a dark suspicion solidifying in my gut. I walked out my front door and into the bright, deceptively cheerful morning. The lawns were green, the sky was blue, and across the street Carol was tending to her award-winning petunias. And she was watering them, not with a hose, but with a series of large, pre-filled plastic watering cans lined up on her porch like a tiny domestic army. The smoking gun, or in this case, the dripping can. I crossed the street, my footsteps feeling unnaturally loud on the silent pavement. She looked up as I approached, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. It was the smile of a chess player who had just checkmated a hamster. "Morning, Carol," I said, keeping my voice as level as possible. "Having a water issue?" "Not at all," she chirped, tilting a can over a pot of vibrant purple flowers. "I believe in being prepared. It's a cornerstone of responsible homeownership. Unlike some." The "some" was aimed at me with the precision of a laser-guided missile. "Right," I said, nodding slowly. "So, you wouldn't happen to know why the entire street's water has been turned off, would you?" She set down her watering can with theatrical slowness and faced me, her expression shifting from smug satisfaction to righteous authority. She placed a hand on her hip. It was her power pose. "As president of the Homeowners Association," she began, and I could practically hear the capital letters, "I have a fiduciary duty to protect the community's infrastructure." My brain short-circuited for a second. Fiduciary duty? She said it like it was a magical incantation that gave her the powers of a minor god who specialized in petty tyranny and lawn care. "Given the unauthorized and extensive plumbing work being done at your residence," she continued, gesturing vaguely toward my house, "a temporary preventative shutdown was deemed necessary to avoid potential contamination or pressure drops in the system." I stared at her. I'm pretty sure my mouth was hanging open. You can't do that," I stammered, the sheer audacity of it momentarily robbing me of my sarcasm. "You don't have the authority to shut off the city's water supply. That's not your infrastructure." She actually puffed out her chest. "Bylaw 34, Section F, gives the board broad authority to take any and all necessary actions to protect community assets. The water lines running under our streets are a community asset. My husband seconded the motion this morning over breakfast. It's all perfectly legal and documented." "You had a board meeting over breakfast?" I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. "What was the vote? 2-0? Did the cat abstain?" Her face hardened. "The decision is final, Leo. The water will be restored once I have personally inspected your contractor's permits and received assurances that no further unsanctioned work will take place." She picked up her watering can and turned back to her flowers. A clear dismissal. The conversation was over. She, a suburban dictator armed with a binder and a misplaced sense of grandeur, had single-handedly plunged 50 homes back into the Dark Ages to make a point about a work van. I walked back to my house, my hands clenched into fists. Fury was bubbling in my chest, a hot, righteous anger. But underneath it, a plan was starting to form. She wanted to talk about authority? Fine. I'd find some real authority. Back in the dusty sanctuary of my kitchen, Dave was looking at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. "So?" "You're not going to believe this," I said, pulling out my phone. "Carol turned it off, the whole neighborhood. She claims she has the authority." Dave let out a low whistle. Wow, that's a new one. I've had HOAs try to fine me for the color of my shirt, but I've never had one commit a felony before. That's what I'm thinking, I said, Googling City of Northwood Water Department. She can't possibly have the right to do this. Navigating the city's automated phone system was its own special kind of hell. Press 1 for billing inquiries. Press 2 for new service. Press 3 to report an outage. For all other inquiries, please stay on the line to be ignored in the order your call was received. The hold music was a tinny, synthesized version of a song that might have been popular in 1987, looped endlessly to erode the listener's will to live. I paced the floor, my sneakers kicking up little puffs of drywall dust, my internal monologue composing a strongly worded letter about the psychological effects of Casio keyboard Vivaldi. After what felt like an eternity, a voice crackled on the line. It was a voice that sounded like it ran on black coffee and unfiltered cigarettes. Water Department, this is Frank. Hi, I said, trying to sound like a calm, rational citizen and not a man on the verge of a caffeine-deprived breakdown. I have a weird situation. I think my HOA president illegally shut off the water to my entire neighborhood. There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear him rolling his eyes. Pleasant Valley Estates? Frank asked, his tone dripping with a profound sense of weary resignation. My own eyes widened. Yeah? How did you know? Got a Carol on the board? He grunted. Short lady looks like she'd report a cloud for loitering. That's the one, I said, a grin spreading across my face. I had found my people. Frank sighed, a sound that conveyed 3 decades of dealing with the public's nonsense. This is the 3rd time this year she's pulled something like this. Tried to fine one of our meter readers last spring for unauthorized lingering. Sir, what your HOA president has done is called tampering with municipal infrastructure. In some states, that's a felony. You're at 114 Primrose Lane? Yes, that's me. All right. Look out your front window. See the sidewalk? About 10 feet from your driveway, is there a small, round metal plate in the grass? About the size of a dinner plate? I walked to the window, peering past the dust sheets. Yeah, I see it. It says water on it. That's us, Frank said with a hint of pride. That's our valve. Not hers. Not the HOA's. Ours. I'm 5 minutes away. Don't go anywhere. This should be fun. The line clicked dead. 5 minutes. It was the best news I'd had all day. I relayed the conversation to Dave, who was now leaning against a newly framed wall, thoroughly enjoying the show. Oh, I am not missing this, he said, rubbing his hands together. True to his word, a slightly battered but very official-looking city water truck rumbled down our street less than 5 minutes later. It pulled to a stop in front of my house with a squeal of brakes that seemed to announce its arrival with authority. Frank got out. He was exactly as I'd pictured him from his voice. Mid-50s, built like a fire hydrant, with a grizzled mustache and a world-weary expression that was his default setting. In one hand, he carried a massive T-shaped wrench that looked like it could be used to start a battleship. He didn't say a word to me. He just gave a slight nod and marched directly to the metal plate in the grass. At that exact moment, as if sensing a disturbance in the force, Carol's front door flew open. She stormed across her lawn and onto the street, her binder clutched to her chest like a shield. "Excuse me!" she shrieked, as Frank used a heavy-duty screwdriver to pry the cover off the valve. "That is HOA common property. What do you think you're doing?" Frank didn't even look at her. He slotted the giant wrench into the valve below and began to turn it with a practiced, steady motion. "My job, ma'am." "I am the president of this association," she sputtered, her face turning a shade of crimson that clashed horribly with her lavender polo shirt. "I ordered that water turned off. You have no right." Frank stopped turning. He straightened up slowly, wiping a hand on his navy blue work pants. He finally turned his full attention to her, his gaze flat and utterly unimpressed. "And I," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "am a senior distribution technician for the City of Northwood Water Department. This valve, this pipe, and the H2O inside it belong to the city, not you. You touch this again, and your next conversation won't be with me. It'll be with the police, about felony destruction of public property. Am I clear?" Carol was stunned into silence. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish that had just been informed about the concept of air. A few neighbors had crept out onto their porches to watch the drama unfold, their faces a mixture of fear and glee. Frank gave the wrench one last, mighty, satisfying turn. There was a deep, resonant thunk from below ground, followed by a glorious, rushing sound. From inside my house, a triumphant roar went up. "We have water!" Dave bellowed. A smattering of applause broke out among the neighbors. Jim from next door gave me a thumbs up from his window. Frank pulled the wrench out, slapped the metal cover back in place, and gave it a firm tap with his boot. He turned to me, and I could have sworn I saw the slightest hint of a smile under his mustache. "You have a good day, sir. Call us if she tries anything else. We keep a record." He pulled a slightly grimy business card from his wallet and pressed it into my hand. "Ask for Frank." As the city truck rumbled away, Carol finally found her voice, a strangled squeak of pure fury, before she spun around and retreated into her fortress of petunias, her back ramrod straight with indignation. I walked back into my house, the hero of the hour. The faucet was sputtering as air cleared from the line. Then a steady, beautiful stream of water poured into my coffee pot. It was the most beautiful sight in the world. I had won the battle. But as I watched Carol's blinds snap shut across the street, I had a sinking feeling the war was just beginning. Victory, it turns out, has the shelf life of milk in the summer sun. The glorious feeling of triumph lasted exactly until 8 a.m. the next morning. That's when I found the envelope. It wasn't in the mailbox. It was taped to my front door with an aggressive amount of Scotch tape, a crisp white rectangle of pure passive aggression. My name and address were typed on the front. In the top left corner, the return address read, Pleasant Valley Estates HOA Board, Office of Compliance. Office of Compliance. It sounded so official, so sterile. I knew for a fact the office was Carol's chintz-covered spare bedroom where she probably held court with her terrified cat. I ripped it open. It wasn't a letter. It was a series of invoices, neatly printed on official-looking letterhead she must have designed herself. My heart sank. She hadn't dared touch the water again, so she'd opened up a new front. She was weaponizing the bylaws. I sat down on my dusty front steps and read the charges. Violation, Bylaw 6B, Non-Regulation Mailbox. Description, mailbox color, obsidian black, is inconsistent with the pre-approved community palette shade, midnight black. Fine, $50. Violation, Bylaw 17C, unauthorized commercial vehicle. Description, a commercial van was observed parked on a residential street for a period exceeding 4 hours on Tuesday. Fine, $100. Violation, Bylaw 22, A, unapproved exterior modification. Description, presence of a large refuse container, dumpster, in public view without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Fine, $75. Violation, Bylaw 41G, creation of a public nuisance. Description, engaging in confrontational behavior with a board member and facilitating unauthorized access to municipal utilities. Fine, $200. I stared at the last one. Facilitating unauthorized access? I called the damn city. She was fining me for fixing the problem she created. The sheer, unmitigated gall was breathtaking. It was like an arsonist fining you for calling the fire department. When Dave arrived a few minutes later, I showed him the list. He didn't look surprised. He just chuckled, shaking his head. "Ah, the paper cut offensive," he said, taking a sip of the coffee I was now able to make. "Classic HOA move. They can't win the big fights, the ones that involve logic or the actual law, so they try to bleed you to death with 1,000 little fines. They hope you'll just pay up to make it go away." "I'm not paying a cent," I grumbled. $50 because my mailbox is the wrong black? What even is midnight black? Does it have sparkles in it?" "Probably," Dave said sagely. "Listen, I once did a job in a neighborhood where the HOA tried to fine the homeowner because my coolers were a non-harmonious shade of primary red. This is the world we live in now." He leaned against the doorframe, his expression turning serious. "You want to fight this? You can't just get mad. You gotta get smart. You need to read the book." "The book?" "The Bible, the Necronomicon, the big book of bad ideas," he said, gesturing vaguely at the neighborhood around us. "The HOA bylaws, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. You need to know that binder better than she does. I guarantee you people like her who write the rules are usually the first ones to break them." He was right. My counteroffensive couldn't be emotional. It had to be procedural. That afternoon, I requested a digital copy of the Pleasant Valley Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions from the HOA's barely functional website. What I received was a 247-page PDF document that read like the unholy love child of a legal textbook and a very specific Pinterest board. I spent hours scrolling through it, a yellow digital highlighter in my hand, my internal monologue growing more and more sarcastic with every page. Bylaw 58. All holiday decorations must be removed within 10 days of the specified holiday. The bylaw then thoughtfully included a list of approved holidays: Christmas, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and the 4th of July. A huge relief, as I had been planning a massive neighborhood-disrupting Arbor Day extravaganza. I guess my inflatable oak tree would have to stay in storage. Bylaw 71. No bird feeders of a novelty design are permitted. What constitutes novelty? The document did not say. Was my classic red barn-shaped feeder a whimsical novelty or a rustic homage? It felt like a question for a panel of philosophers. Bylaw 93. All front-facing garage doors must remain closed at all times, except for immediate ingress and egress. I imagined Carol with a stopwatch, timing how long it took Jim from next door to carry his groceries from the car. It was a labyrinth of bureaucratic nonsense designed to give the board unlimited power to harass anyone they didn't like. But then, buried deep in a section about enforcement, I found it. A tiny, beautiful, glorious loophole. Article 14, Section D. All official notices of violation, including fines and summons, must be delivered to the homeowner of record via United States Postal Service certified mail to ensure receipt. Not taped to the door, not shoved in the mailbox, delivered via certified mail. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across my face. She'd been so eager to strike that she'd broken her own rules. I spent the next 20 minutes crafting an email. It was a masterpiece of polite, corporate-speak venom. Subject: regarding violation notices dated. Yesterday's date. Dear Pleasant Valley Estates HOA Board, I am writing to acknowledge receipt of several violation notices which were affixed to my front door this morning. I appreciate the board's commitment to upholding community standards. However, upon reviewing the governing documents, specifically Article 14, Section D, it is my understanding that all official notices of violation must be delivered via USPS certified mail. As these notices were not served in the prescribed manner, I must unfortunately consider them null and void at this time. I look forward to receiving any future correspondence through the proper channels. Best regards, Leo Thompson, 114 Primrose Lane. I CC'd the generic board@" email address, which I knew went to her and her two cronies, and for good measure, I CC'd Carol's personal HOA president email address directly. I hit send and imagined her reading it, her face turning that wonderful shade of crimson again. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. I hadn't just fought back. I had used her own weapon, her sacred binder of rules, against her. The paper-cut offensive had been parried, for now. My procedural victory lasted for 2 blissful, fine-free days. On the 3rd day, the mailman arrived, looking unusually grim. He handed me a stiff green and white envelope that required my signature. Certified mail. Carol was learning. Inside were the exact same fines, now officially and properly served. Attached was a sticky note, written in sharp, angry cursive. As per your request. She was escalating. I knew it was only a matter of time before her campaign moved from paper to direct action. It happened that afternoon. Dave's crew was in the driveway, using a wet saw to cut the new porcelain tiles for the kitchen floor. It made a high-pitched whining sound, a noise that screamed progress to me and unbearable nuisance to Carol. Sure enough, she appeared. This time she came armed with a smartphone, which she held up in landscape mode, filming my driveway like a citizen journalist exposing corruption at City Hall. It is currently 2:15 p.m. on a Thursday, she narrated loudly, panning her phone from the tile saw to Dave, then to me as I came to the door. The noise levels are simply intolerable, creating a hostile living environment for the entire community. This is a clear violation of our right to peaceful enjoyment. Dave shut off the saw. The sudden silence was deafening. "Carol," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose, "it's the middle of a weekday. This is a construction site. It makes noise." "The quality of the noise is excessively disruptive," she insisted. "It's a high-frequency screech. My Shih Tzu is traumatized." Dave, to his credit, just looked at her. "Ma'am, it's a tile saw. It saws tile. I can't exactly ask it to do it more quietly." "This is unacceptable," she declared. "I am a board president, and you are violating my peaceful enjoyment. I'm calling the police." And she did. She actually called 911 to report a legally permitted tile saw. I watched in stunned disbelief as she described the deafening racket to the dispatcher. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled slowly down our street and parked behind Dave's van. 2 officers got out. One was young, with a fresh-faced, slightly bored look on his face. This was Officer Miller. The other was older, with a weary posture and an expression that said he was 2 years, 3 months, and 6 days from retirement. This, I would learn, was Officer Schmidt. Carol scurried over to them, her phone still recording. "Officers, thank you for coming. This man," she said, pointing at Dave, "has been creating a deafening racket well past the 9 a.m. start time mandated by the city ordinance." Officer Miller checked his watch with an exaggerated motion. "Ma'am, it's almost 2:45 p.m. They're well within the legal hours for construction work." "But the decibel level," she insisted. "Surely there are limits. My dog, Bartholomew, has had to be sedated." Officer Schmidt, the older one, sighed the sigh of a man who had seen the absolute bottom of the barrel of human complaints. He turned to me, his eyes tired. "Is this about the water thing from last week?" My respect for him grew tenfold. The legend of my little spat had clearly made the rounds at the precinct. "It might be tangentially related, officer," I said with a slight shrug. Dave stepped forward, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Officers, I'm Dave, the contractor. Here's our city-issued permit." He handed a laminated card to Miller. "All our work is permitted. We're just cutting tile." Miller glanced at the permit and handed it back. "Looks good to me." He turned back to Carol. "Ma'am, they have the right permits. They're working within the legal time frame outlined by City Ordinance 113.8. There's nothing we can do here. This is a civil matter for your HOA." "This is an outrage," Carol shrieked, her voice cracking. "I demand you write them a ticket for disturbing the peace." Officer Schmidt finally spoke, his voice a low grumble. "For what? For working legally?" "Ma'am, with all due respect, we have actual crimes to deal with. A guy is legally cutting tile in the middle of a Thursday afternoon. Unless that saw suddenly becomes sentient and starts chasing your dog, this is not a police matter. Please, try to resolve this amongst yourselves." The finality in his tone was unmistakable. The cops were not on her side. They were not her personal army. They were two tired guys who wanted to get back to their car and finish their coffee. They turned and walked away, Schmidt shaking his head and Miller trying, and failing, to hide a smirk. Carol was left standing in the middle of the street, utterly defeated. Her phone was no longer recording. She stared at me, her eyes promising a reckoning of biblical proportions, before she spun around and stalked back to her house. From the driveway, Dave's crew, who had been watching the entire exchange in silence, broke into a spontaneous round of applause. Dave gave me a wide grin. "Round 2 goes to Leo," he said. The victory felt good, but also unsettling. I had now successfully tangled with the city and the police and come out on top. I was building a reputation. And in a neighborhood ruled by a petty tyrant, a reputation is a dangerous thing to have. For the next week, the war went cold. There were no more fines, no more police calls. Just a constant, simmering tension. Every time I left my house, I could feel Carol's eyes on me from behind her pristine windows. I was being watched, monitored, my every move logged for a future tribunal. It was exhausting. I realized I couldn't keep fighting this alone. I was one man against a deeply entrenched regime. I needed allies. I needed to know if I was the only one living under the shadow of the binder. My first recruit came to me, indirectly, through a basketball hoop. Down the street lived the Garcias, a young family with 2 kids under the age of 10. They had a bright orange portable basketball hoop in their driveway. Every evening, I'd see Mr. Garcia and his son out shooting hoops. And every evening around sundown, I'd see them sheepishly wheel the entire contraption into their garage, like they were hiding a fugitive. One evening, I was taking out the trash. Precisely at 7:02 p.m., well within the legally mandated window, thank you very much, and saw Mr. Garcia beginning the nightly ritual. I decided to take a chance. "Hey," I said, giving a friendly wave. "Getting the daily workout in?" He gave me a weary smile. "Trying to, before the compliance patrol comes by." He glanced nervously toward Carol's house. His name was Miguel. "The hoop is a problem?" I asked, feigning ignorance. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You have no idea. We got a notice last month, Bylaw 84. No temporary structures, including but not limited to recreational equipment, may be left in public view overnight. We've gotten 3 fines so far, $50 a pop. My son loves this thing, but we can't afford to keep paying the hoop tax." "I get it," I said, my voice low. "I've been getting my own share of fines. Mailbox color, the dumpster." Miguel's eyes lit up with recognition. "You're Leo, the water guy. Man, that was legendary. My wife and I were cheering you on from our living room." "Glad to provide some entertainment," I laughed. "Listen, have you ever thought about fighting these fines?" "What's the point?" he said, his shoulders slumping. "She's the president. She just does what she wants. We just want to live here peacefully, you know? We don't want trouble." "I think the trouble already found us," I said. As we were talking, an older gentleman who had been tending his roses nearby ambled over. He was trim, in his 70s, with kind eyes and hands covered in dirt. I'd seen him around but never spoken to him. "Fighting with Carol, are we?" he asked, a knowing twinkle in his eye. "It's about time someone did. The name's Henderson. Arthur Henderson." We shook hands. "Leo Thompson. This is Miguel Garcia." "I know Miguel," Arthur said with a nod. "I've seen you hiding that basketball hoop. It's a disgrace. A boy should be able to have a hoop." He looked at me. "And I heard about your business with the water department. Very well played, young man. Very well played indeed." "Thanks," I said, though now I seem to be paying for it with daily harassment. Arthur leaned on his garden spade, his expression turning thoughtful. "Her power is procedural, my boy," he said, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "She counts on you not knowing the procedure. She counts on people like Miguel here being too intimidated to question her. The fines, the notices, the meetings. It's all a carefully constructed game of bluff and intimidation. But games have rules. And I suspect, after 35 years as a contract lawyer, that our dear Carol isn't very good at following them herself." My jaw dropped. A lawyer. A retired lawyer who lived 3 doors down and clearly had an axe to grind with the HOA president. It was like finding a unicorn. "A lawyer?" I asked, unable to hide my excitement. "Retired," he corrected with a smile. "But the brain still works. And frankly, my petunias are getting boring. This is much more interesting." He looked at my house, then at Miguel's. "She's overstepping her authority. The fines she's levying are likely punitive and selectively enforced, which is a big no-no. If you boys are serious about fighting this, I'd be willing to consult. Pro bono, of course, for the good of the neighborhood." A secret alliance was forged right there on the sidewalk between a rebellious homeowner, a brow-beaten father, and a bored, brilliant retired lawyer. Leo the front man, Miguel the sympathetic witness, and Arthur the legal mastermind. The rebellion had its first members. We weren't just a collection of disgruntled neighbors anymore. We were a movement. Armed with Arthur Henderson's quiet, tactical genius, our strategy shifted. He advised against outright defiance. "Don't break the rules," he'd told us over iced tea in his perfectly manicured backyard. "Embrace them. Follow them so perfectly, so obsessively, that it drives her insane. We'll build a case that you're a model citizen and she's a predator. It's called malicious compliance. And it's an art form." I decided to become a Picasso of petty obedience. My life became a series of vignettes, a montage of meticulous rule-following designed to highlight the absurdity of it all. First came the garbage cans. Bylaw 45 stated, "Garbage and recycling receptacles may not be visible from the street, except between the hours of 6 p.m. on the day prior to collection and 8 p.m. on the day of collection." I set 2 recurring alarms on my phone, labeled "Release the Bins" and "Contain the Bins." At 6:01 p.m. every Tuesday, I would dramatically wheel my 2 large plastic cans to the curb. I'd make a show of it, ensuring they were perfectly aligned, 6 inches from the pavement as recommended by the city. I'd give a cheerful wave to Carol's house, where I knew she was watching. Then, on Wednesday evening, my 8:01 p.m. alarm would go off, and I would march out and wheel them back into the garage with the solemnity of a pallbearer. After the second week, Miguel Garcia started doing it too. We'd nod to each other across our lawns, 2 soldiers in a silent, ridiculous war. Next was the lawn. Bylaw 12. Grass must not exceed a height of 4 inches. This was a classic. The following Saturday, I went to the hardware store and bought a small, precise metal ruler. Every morning, with my coffee in hand, I would walk out to a patch of grass near her property line and measure it. I brought a small notepad and a pen. I'd jot down a number, nod thoughtfully, and walk back inside. I wasn't just mowing my lawn, I was curating it. Dave found this particularly hilarious and suggested I get a tiny lab coat to complete the look. Then there was the matter of the renovation debris. Bylaw 22C. All construction materials and related debris must be neatly stored and covered by a neutral-colored tarp when not in active use. I showed the rule to Dave. His eyes lit up. "Oh, we can do neat," he said with a grin. He and his crew spent the last hour of their day not just cleaning up, but creating a work of art. They stacked leftover scraps of drywall and 2x4S into a perfect geometric cube. They coiled extension cords with a precision that would make a sailor weep. Then, they unfurled a brand new, beige-colored tarp, perfectly neutral, and stretched it taut over the pile. They didn't just throw it on. They secured it with a series of bungee cords in a symmetrical, crisscrossing diamond pattern. It was the most beautifully, obsessively tidy pile of garbage the world had ever seen. My malicious compliance began to have a ripple effect. I saw Mrs. Garcia measuring the distance between her hanging flower baskets to ensure they met the 24-inch separation requirement. Old man Hemlock down the block, who'd been feuding with Carol for years over his political yard signs, only permitted 30 days before an election, started putting up signs that just said "Election Day is coming," with no date. The effect on Carol was magnificent. My property was immaculate. I was, on paper, the perfect resident. There was nothing she could find me for. My cheerful waves, my meticulous measurements, the sheer glee I took in following her stupid rules to the absolute letter. It was driving her up the wall. Her power came from catching people in violations. By never violating anything, I had disarmed her, but I had also cornered her, and a cornered animal is a dangerous one. The peace couldn't last. She had been publicly humiliated by the water department and the police, and now she was being privately mocked by my perfect compliance. Her authority was a joke. I knew she would have to make a final desperate move to reassert her dominance. The only question was when. The other shoe dropped on a rainy Tuesday morning. It arrived, as I knew it would, via certified mail. The envelope felt heavy, important. This wasn't a fine. This was something more. I signed for it, thanked the mailman, and opened it with a sense of dread and excitement. Inside, on the familiar, self-important HOA letterhead, was a formal summons. Notice of emergency HOA board meeting. Agenda: to discuss continued patterns of community disruption and non-compliance by the homeowner at 114 Primrose Lane, Leo Thompson. Purpose: to hear testimony from fellow residents and the board, and to hold a vote on appropriate sanctions as per the governing documents. Potential sanctions. Sanctions to be considered include, but are not limited to, extensive fines, liens against the property, and the initiation of proceedings for a forced sale of the property as per covenant. Article 12, Section F. I read that last line twice. Forced sale. The HOA nuclear option. The ultimate power fantasy of every petty tyrant on a suburban board. It was a clause buried so deep in the bylaws I'd barely paid it any mind, assuming it was reserved for homes that had literally collapsed into a sinkhole or were being used as a meth lab. She was trying to take my house because I'd followed her rules too well. This was it, the final showdown. She was calling me out in front of the entire neighborhood, trying to make an example of me. My phone buzzed. It was Miguel. "Did you get one?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "I did," I said. "The forced sale clause. She's really doing it." "This is crazy, Leo. They can't do that, can they?" "That's what we're going to find out," I said grimly. That evening, the war room convened. We gathered in my half-finished kitchen, the smell of fresh paint in the air. Me, Dave, who had insisted on being there, stating he had a vested interest in my continued residency. Miguel and his wife, Maria, and our legal eagle, Arthur Henderson. Arthur read the summons, a small smile playing on his lips. "This is perfect," he said, tapping the paper. "She's overplayed her hand completely. She's drunk on power and she's gotten sloppy." "Sloppy how?" I asked. "It looks pretty terrifying to me." "A forced sale is an extraordinary remedy, Leo," Arthur explained, his eyes glinting. "To even consider it, the board needs to demonstrate a pattern of repeated, demonstrable, and uncured violations that cause tangible harm to the community's property values or safety. You, my boy, have been the model citizen. You have cured every alleged violation, real or imagined. We are going to show everyone that the only person causing harm to this community is her." We spent the next hour laying out our plan. It was simple and elegant. Carol was expecting me to come in angry and defensive. Instead, I would be calm, prepared, and armed with facts. Miguel and Maria would speak as character witnesses, describing their own experiences with Carol's selective enforcement. Arthur would attend as a concerned resident and use his legal knowledge to poke holes in her procedures from the floor. "She controls the meeting, so she thinks she controls the narrative," Arthur said. "We're going to hijack it, but we need a knockout punch, something undeniable." I grinned. "Oh, I've got an ace up my sleeve. I have a friend at the water department." The community clubhouse was a place of profound beigeness. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing a long beige table at the front. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old coffee and suburban anxiety. About 30 residents were there, a mix of Carol's elderly loyalists, a few curious onlookers who were clearly just there for the drama, and my small band of rebels. Carol sat at the center of the table, flanked by her 2 bored cronies, a meek woman named Barb, who nodded at everything Carol said, and Carol's own husband, a man named Gary who looked permanently embarrassed to be alive. Carol was wearing her power suit, a sensible navy blue number, and had her binder open in front of her like a judge's gavel. She banged a small wooden gavel on the table. "This emergency meeting of the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA is now in session," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. She launched into her opening statement, a masterwork of passive-aggressive rhetoric. She painted me as a rogue element, a disruptive force who had moved into their peaceful, harmonious community with the sole intention of sowing chaos. She listed my violations, the mailbox, the truck, the dumpster, embellishing each one. She talked about the unbearable noise from my renovation. She spoke of my disrespect for the board's authority. She strategically, and very deliberately, left out the water incident. "This pattern of behavior has left the board with no choice," she concluded, her voice dripping with false regret. "We must consider all options to protect our property values and our way of life." She then opened the floor to me. "Mr. Thompson, do you have anything to say in your defense?" I stood up, holding a thin folder. I felt surprisingly calm. "I do, thank you, Carol." I saw her flinch at the use of her first name. "First," I began, my voice steady, "regarding the fines. The mailbox fine was for the shade of black, a detail not specified in the bylaws, which I have since painted to midnight black at my own expense. The truck fine was for a vehicle essential to a permitted renovation. The dumpster fine was for a dumpster that was also part of that permitted renovation and which has since been removed. And the public nuisance fine appears to be for reporting an illegal act to the proper authorities. I haven't just complied with the rules, I've gone above and beyond." I could see some of the residents nodding. This wasn't the angry tirade they had been expecting. Now, I'd like to address the idea that I've been a disruptive neighbor. I turned to the Garcias. Miguel, Maria, would you mind sharing your experience with the board? Miguel stood up, nervous but resolute. He told the story of the basketball hoop, of the repeated fines, of feeling intimidated. We're just a family who wants our son to be able to play outside, he finished, his voice thick with emotion. We never felt like we could speak up. An angry murmur went through the room. This wasn't just about me anymore. That was Arthur's cue. He raised a hand politely. A point of order, Madam President, he said, his calm, authoritative voice cutting through the chatter. Carol looked flustered. This isn't a town hall, Arthur. Of course, Arthur said smoothly. I just have a procedural question for the board. Could the board please provide the official, written minutes from the emergency board meeting where the decision was made to shut off the municipal water supply last month? The room went dead silent. Carol's face went pale. That was an emergency verbal vote, as allowed for in situations of extreme risk, she stammered. Interesting, Arthur said, stroking his chin. Because I've read the bylaws cover to cover, and I can't for the life of me find any provision for a verbal vote that allows the board to tamper with public utilities. Could you point me to that section? Carol was speechless. Her husband, Gary, sank lower in his chair, looking like he wanted the beige carpet to swallow him whole. This was my moment, the knockout punch. You know, I said, pulling out my smartphone, I was also very concerned about the water main issue. I was worried it might happen again, so I decided to consult an outside expert on municipal infrastructure. I tapped my screen and put the phone on speaker, placing it in the middle of the table. Frank, are you there? A familiar, gravelly voice boomed through the clubhouse, making everyone jump. I'm here, Leo. Frank, I said, a wide grin spreading across my face. Could you please introduce yourself to the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA? Name's Frank, the voice declared. Senior Distribution Technician, City of Northwood Water Department. 32 years on the job. The silence in the room was now absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the beige carpet. Frank, I continued, could you briefly explain to the board the legal status of the main water valve for our community? Simple, Frank's voice crackled. It belongs to the city. It is a crime for any unauthorized person to touch it, operate it, or otherwise tamper with it. It's not a suggestion. It's state law. Carol looked like she had seen a ghost. And Frank, I said, delivering the final blow, what was the official determination regarding the outage here last month? I was the tech on scene, Frank said, his voice hard as iron. The outage was caused by an illegal, unauthorized shutdown of the municipal valve by a civilian. My report states that person identified herself as your HOA president, Carol. We have an open file on this address. Let me be perfectly clear to everyone in that room. Any further tampering with our utilities, and my next call won't be to Leo. It'll be to the Northwood Police Department, and we will be pressing felony charges. We don't take kindly to people messing with the public water supply. The phone line clicked off. For a second, there was nothing. Then, chaos erupted. Residents were on their feet, shouting. Not at me, at Carol. They were furious, horrified. You broke the law, someone yelled. You exposed us all to that? Barb, the board crony, looked horrified and began frantically shaking her head, whispering, I didn't know, I didn't know. Gary just put his head in his hands. An elderly woman in the front row, whom I recognized as one of Carol's staunchest allies, stood up and pointed a trembling finger at the head table. I move for a vote of no confidence in Carol as board president. Second, shouted a half-dozen voices at once. It was a landslide, a public execution. Carol was voted out, 28-2, with her and her husband being the only dissenting votes. She sat there, utterly broken, as her reign of terror came to a swift and brutal end. Months have passed. It's a crisp Saturday morning in late autumn, and I'm sitting in my beautiful, fully completed kitchen. The sunlight streams through the new window, illuminating the quartz countertops and the gleaming stainless steel appliances. The only sound is the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft bubbling of the coffee pot. It's perfect. It's peaceful. The HOA is a different beast now. After Carol's spectacular fall from grace, a special election was held. A committee of reasonable people now runs the show, including Miguel Garcia. Their first act was to formally rescind every fine Carol had issued in the past year. Their second was to pass a new bylaw, which everyone laughingly refers to as the Leo Clause, explicitly forbidding the board from ever, under any circumstances, touching public utilities. Carol and Gary put their house on the market a week after the meeting. It sold in a month. I can't say I miss seeing her glare at me from across the street. The new neighbors are a young couple with a golden retriever who seems to delight in violating the no excessive barking bylaw, and no one cares one bit. My phone buzzes on the counter. I pick it up. It's a text message from a number I don't have saved, but I know exactly who it is. It's a single photo. The picture shows a familiar, slightly battered city water truck parked in front of the entrance to a brand new housing development called Willow Creek Reserve. Underneath the picture is a single line of text. New neighborhood. Guess who just got elected to their HOA board? I stare at the message for a second before a loud, barking laugh escapes my lips. I can just picture it. A new binder, a new set of bylaws, a new unsuspecting community about to learn the difference between obsidian black and midnight black. Some people never change. I type back a quick reply. God help them. You on standby? His reply is instant, always. I shake my head, still smiling, and pour myself a fresh cup of coffee. I take a sip. The water is clean, the coffee is hot, and the kitchen is quiet. They say you can't fight City Hall. But sometimes, if you're lucky, City Hall fights with you. And as for fighting the HOA, well, that's a different story. You can't just fight them. You have to win. And winning, it turns out, is best served with a fresh cup of coffee from a tap that works exactly as it should.